Raad, welcome to the Boni podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I have so many things I want to ask you. I'll start with something. I'm just curious. Why did you get fired from CVS?
Yeah, I think there was one night where someone asked me to vacuum the aisle or whatever. And I think I was like the youngest worker there. And I just didn't want to vacuum it because like they were supposed to be an every other day sort of thing. And they were just kind of like, no, you got to vacuum it. I was like, no, I don't want to. I'd rather just do anything else. And then they pretty much sort of fired me the next day. They found some sort of excuse. They were just like, oh, your cash register was short by like 36 cents. But I knew it's because I kind of just pushed back on doing something I genuinely didn't want to do. And I think there's like a common theme in my life where I just don't like being told what to do. And I'm kind of a little bit of a free thinker. And maybe that sort of seeded the plants of like not really ever being able to hold a steady job ever since then, which, leads into like a bigger story.
So you've never held a job?
I have, but they were very short lived. I just wasn't very good at showing up at one place at a specific time and doing the same thing over and over again. I'm just not a very big morning person. So whenever I had to sort of just forcefully wake up, that would just dampen my mood right then and there. B, I'm just a curious person. So if I'm told to do something and I don't really understand the why behind it, I'm just not going to be naturally into it. So I'm going to do it by force. And I think I did that with a lot of my other jobs because I needed the money. But just wasn't going to be, I knew something that was going to be long lasting because I'd rather be poor than do something that I'm not genuinely interested in. Before CVS, I've worked at Jones Beach, at a concession stand. I worked at a country club as a food server, waiter person, did a bunch of weddings. I had a CVS job. And then I worked at a couple of law firms. And luckily, those were pretty short because they were kind of, while I was in law school, they were kind of 2 or 3 months long. But it was just enough to feel like, okay, this has to end at some point because I need to look at the writing on the wall. And, I just got into making stuff on the internet instead.
And I'd love to talk about your company, but so I'm curious. Now you have this company and you manage people. How would you deal with someone like you, like your old self, someone that's a free thinker and maybe doesn't take or takes direction, but doesn't want to do exactly what they're told and things like that?
Yeah, I actually try to find those people. I'm not the very best manager. So I think like the people that we hire, the people that we bring on really have to be sort of like self-starters and self-managers and just be genuinely curious. Like I'm good with sort of setting the stage and setting the vision and letting them know why this work is important and the impact it could have on the greater society if we succeed. And then after that, it's really just sort of up to them on how they perform. I think money is a decent motivator, but if you're sort of building anything sort of early stage, you really need people to go way beyond just money being the main motivator. It needs to be something that comes from the heart. And that's the only way you're really going to succeed when you're doing something really early stage, especially in the technology sector, especially within law, where there's been institutions that are around for hundreds of years and you're just sort of this less than 10-year-old startup trying to disrupt it. You need people to go to the extreme, and extreme actions lead to extreme results. So I try to actively find those people. And that's why it's very hard for us to hire as well, because there's not too many of them out there.
And you have this flywheel concept that you've written about. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So a flywheel is essentially just a set of actions you take, and one thing kind of leads to another thing, which leads to another thing, which leads to another thing. And then you're able to sort of repeat that process. Like, for example, within the context of, I think my personal flywheel, I don't remember from the top of my head, but I think it's something along the lines of creating something and then sort of publishing it out into the world and getting some visitors and traction and feedback from it, which then makes me want to create more, which then sort of publishes more, which gets more people out there. And I use a similar approach to different companies that I build. There needs to be some sort of cycle that it goes through, which one thing leads to another, right? So if you build out a platform and if you're someone like Uber, more drivers on the road equals faster pickups from people that are requesting drivers, which brings in more drivers on the road, which then brings in more passenger, which creates more revenue, which drives down the cost more. So I think a lot of things in life and also any sort of business that you do, it's helpful to just look at it in kind of that high level framework to just know that, over the next 10 years, if you do this thing, there's going to be some sort of compounding effect to that. So yeah, I just kind of did it for my personal self as well.
Obviously, you're Bangladeshi, but do you find yourself to be very in touch with your Bengaliness, if, for lack of a better word? Are you close with your family in Bangladesh and things like that?
Yes and no. I was born here in the US, and then I went back when I was really young for a year when I was like 1 or 2 years
Oh, okay.
old. I've only gone back like 2 or 3 times since then. One time when I was 16, and then another time recently. Actually, my mom passed away. So I went back for that. And it's interesting, right? All of my relatives are pretty much in Bangladesh, right? Really in the
Oh,
US, it was just my dad and my mom and some of their like college friends that are around here. I have cousins that are in Australia and some that are in Florida, but like nowhere really near me. So I never had this big Bengali family type experience growing up. But when I went back for the funeral and I saw my uncles and my aunts and my cousins, it was like we didn't even skip a beat. I felt like I sort of knew them my entire life, and family's family. And I think it's been different for me just because I haven't had a lot of that kind of growing up. But when I did experience it, I think it's definitely had a profound enough experience for me to want to sort of go back more often and
yeah.
cultivate those relationships a little bit more.
Where in
Um,
New York did you grow up?
I grew up in Queens.
What part of Queens?
I was born in Elmhurst,
Okay.
Elmhurst Hospital, and we lived in Richmond Hill for like
Okay.
quite some
So
time.
did you not have, I get, I understand no family, but did you not have sort of like a Bengali enclave where, you kind of make people that are not your family into your family, not you, but your parents?
Yeah, they had friends that they went to like college with or high school with
Yeah.
that ended up immigrating around the same time as them. So I was lucky enough to have like a couple of core friends around my age, plus or minus 1 year, that I grew up with at family parties and things
Understood.
like that. And actually, I'm going to one of those friends. He's getting married in 2 weeks, and I'm actually going to see him. And we've been able to sort of stay in touch. And that was there, and they were basically family, right? I basically just, I
Of
mean,
course.
even to this day, I consider my friends like family members that I can pick. I
Yeah.
think about the same way as my college friends and some of the people that I kind of grew up with. But yeah, they were there, and that was cool. I wasn't as lonely growing up, and I still keep in touch with most of
Yeah.
them. Actually, not that much, but
Yeah, that's what happens. I grew up in a building, all Bengali, pretty much 40 Bengali families. They just end up becoming like family.
I ended up moving to Long Island when I was in the 6th grade or something, and I
Okay.
stayed there for middle school and high school and part of elementary school. And they visited it, but I feel like kind of at least at that time in Long Island, there was just not a whole lot of Bengali people, not a whole lot of brown people really in general. And that was just kind of who I felt most comfortable with. And plus we moved around a lot. So like, I
Mm,
don't know, it was just weird. I really didn't enjoy high
yeah.
school that much. I was kind of a little bit of a loner. I was into like music. I was into like creating things. I was into like things that were just very different than varsity sports, or
Mm.
I actually wasn't even that great of a student, to be honest with you. I just
Oh, wow.
worked on other projects and other ideas. And
I was asking about how connected you are to being Bengali because I really enjoy talking to people like you that are entrepreneurs because there's not a lot of Bengali entrepreneurs, and I feel like there's a sort of mindset that we Bengalis that grew up here fall into, including me. We go for these safe careers, doing the 9 to 5, which is it's ironic because our parents came here and they risk a lot of things for us to have a better life and probably take more risks for them. But a lot of people like me and a lot of my friends end up taking these safer roads. And I'm trying to figure out like what happened that was different with you. And I have some friends that are also entrepreneurs, but most of them are not. Most of my Bengali friends are not. They're doing the 9 to 5. So I'm just trying to
yeah, it's an
feel
interesting
away at that.
yeah, it's an interesting topic because I've definitely talked about this before with some of my Bengali friends or like older family members. I think that the bottom line is that, at least for me, when my parents immigrated here, right, they had no choice but to start a business. They came with nothing. They didn't really have any sort of advanced degrees or anything like that. A bunch of my friends that I actually met in college, they were like pharmacists and they came here, they opened up their own pharmacies. My dad didn't. And it was almost like starting a business and entrepreneurship was sort of the last resort kind of thing.
Mm,
And the thing that they really wished they had were degrees, were white collar jobs, or going in,
yeah.
having a boss, having a paycheck, making $100,000 a year, right? Like whatever thing that they sort of dreamt of as the American dream was what they sort of wanted their kids to have. And as I mentioned, I was never really interested in money like that, even though like we've had our ups and downs and we grew up pretty poor. And at some point, my dad made like a decent amount of money and bought a house in Long Island, but then he like lost it all. It was always very fluctuating and up and down, and it led to a lot of fights and separate sort of side conversation with that about like wealth creation and how I think about it. And but I think that Bengali parents really value status, prestige in the realm of like society and degrees and law school and being a lawyer, being a doctor, which is kind of like the obvious thing, right? Like you kind of see a lot of people, and then you just get people that either listen to them and people that don't. And I didn't really listen to my parents that much. And it was mainly my dad, right? He was sort of the force in the household. And my mom was sort of like, "Yeah, okay, do your thing, follow your passion or whatever." And I kind of just listened to my mom a little bit more than my dad. And you just got to go through a lot of shit. Anytime you do something against what the norm is, you're going to get a lot of uncomfortable pushback. And for most people, they just, I don't think really want to deal with that pushback for what maybe what people think about them or the risks that they're taking or what if they fail or I'm not pleasing my parents. There's like a multitude of reasons to not do the thing that probably is the quote unquote better path, which for me was freedom, right? That was a big part of it. I wanted to build something where I didn't have to be at a certain place at a certain time. I didn't have anybody sort of tell me what to do. Money was never something I really had to think twice about. I had that vision for myself when I was like 15, 16 years old. And then all the jobs that I had just further validated that this just isn't me. I'm not built this way. I like creating. I don't like just doing something over and over again. So I think within the Bengali community, it comes a little bit to that society, parents, what your view of wealth and money is. I said that I don't care about money, but I meant like I don't really care about the salary. I care about creating wealth in the form of equity and enriching lots of people in that process. And you need some of that leverage to really make a difference in the world and make a difference in society. But I would be just as happy if I just made the bare minimum to eat, but I got to create and do my own thing. I got to make websites. I got to touch millions of people's lives on the internet and I got to improve it in some sort of way. Like that is something money can't buy. And that's an experience that has to be created and cultivated. And I couldn't see any other way, really, honestly. Now my parents obviously came around and my dad was just like, wow, okay, cool. This makes a lot of sense. But it took him a really long time to A, accept that, B, not be mad at me for like not being a lawyer and not taking the bar. Like I literally just signed up for the bar and then the day before I just didn't take it and I launched the startup instead. And you go through a lot of that. And I guess I never really grew up craving appreciation from others. And like I said, in high school, I was a super quiet kid. I was a little bit of a loner. Like I never looked for social approval really. And I guess that always stuck with me. And I think if you look back in time and you look at all these different famous founders, right, whether it's Steve Jobs or Larry Page or Larry Ellison, like they were all weird in their own ways growing up. Like they were a little bit of like misfits. And I didn't know that at the time, right? I wasn't really reading a whole lot of business books at the time or a whole lot of autobiographies. But I think in retrospect, when I look back at my life and now that I have read a few books on people that have done successful things, they were always a little weird in some way. They didn't really fit in. They were always against the grain of society. So if anything, I'm even leaning more towards that now that I'm doing okay and we have a bunch of employees and the business is growing. And I still don't want to feel comfortable and I still want to push it to the limit and still be a misfit also within the startup world because it's also easy to get into that bubble as well and be like everybody else. But yeah, that's a longer winded answer for how I think about why other Bengali people don't go into startups.
Yeah, makes sense. Why law?
So in undergrad, I studied philosophy of law and I really like philosophy and I like reading, I like writing. I wasn't very good at hard sciences. I originally started as a chemistry major and just wasn't into it. And it was more forced than anything, right? And I feel like anything in life, if it feels like it is something that you have to force yourself doing it, and if it doesn't feel like play, you're always going to be worse than somebody else out there that literally views that as like, I'm just hanging out, I'm just playing, I'm just writing these equations or whatever. You're not going to be able to beat that person. So I switched into philosophy and I don't know, I think just abstractly, I got law. It felt like a piece of code that society wrote. And then there's people sort of following it and operating within those confines. And sometimes you can change that law. And then there's a different sort of thing that happens within society and it can sort of get evolved. And I like the sort of analysis of it from a very sort of zoomed out way. Like that is how society kind of operates, is through rules and laws. And sometimes you break them to create new laws. Sometimes you bend them. Sometimes to evolve as a species, you need to sort of change them up. So I think abstractly, I was into it in that way. And then the second part of it was I said that I never really cared about pleasing my parents. And that's true. But I think deep down, especially at that age, there was still a part of me that they would be proud if I sort of had the title as a lawyer, because then they can go and introduce me to their family friends and say that, hey, my son is a lawyer, right? And I got that. And there was definitely a part of me that also did it for them. And I kind of forced that. And that's why kind of towards the end, I ended up graduating and got my JD. I didn't like drop out or anything, even though I really wanted to, because I was working on different internet products that were sort of doing way better than any job that I would have gotten coming out of law school. But I still stuck around it. I still got my JD. But I just knew probably after my first or second year of law school, maybe like my first year, that I was just like, yeah, there's no way I could work as a lawyer. It just didn't make any sense to me. It was just like, okay, it wasn't a job at CVS, but it was still a job, right? I got to wear a tie to work, which I hated. I don't even get the point of a tie. It didn't make any sense to me. And, you get to go to like a fancy office, you get to work out of the city, but you're still working under somebody else. You're making somebody else get richer in the process of you getting some sort of menial salary. And then I just knew I could sort of build something better than this sort of institution of a law firm, which hasn't been really fundamentally changed in the last century. But yeah, that's why law. I liked it from an abstract way. I liked how it made me think. I definitely feel like it made me a better writer going to law school, because you have to be really succinct. You're just always removing words. You have to be very concise. It's like surgical writing almost. And I think there's a lot of degrees out there that you get that don't give you really practical skills, but I think getting a law degree really helps you become a better reader and a better writer. And I think that is a foundation of anything and everything you do, whether it's startups or you're opening up your own thing. There's nothing that beats being able to read something complex and really understand it and level up your level of understanding, and then being able to like translate that into your own words and communicate anything that you're doing to anybody else in the world in the easiest ways. So I don't regret it.
Yeah. I looked at your reading list. One thing I took away from that is incredibly diverse. You had Watchmen to Everyday Cook to Principles. What sort of reading mood are you in now?
I'm definitely reading a lot more on philosophy, epistemology, metaphysics, spirituality.
Oh, wow.
Things within that realm of ego, consciousness, how your emotions work, how you can observe your emotions. I got into meditation for the last 2 or 3 years. But yeah, I think most of the reading material is now based around the mind and how the mind operates and why we do the things we do, why we think the way we think, with ultimately the goal of just basically, how do you think for yourself when you are surrounded by, I don't know, the society we live in? It's very easy to just go with the flow. Even after you start a startup, it's like you just do a startup and, oh yeah, you're your own boss and you're totally fine. You still think about a lot of, it's a game. It's just a different game. I think my ultimate goal is I never want to play someone else's game. I want to create my own game. I want to create my own rules. I want to play within that. And I think that a lot of the books I'm reading now, there's this author, Jed McKenna. He came out with this really good trilogy, Spirituality. I read a lot of Osho, a few other authors, but like my Goodreads account is a little bit more updated, but you'll sort of see the trend now moving away from practical business books and things like that to more sort of out of body, out of mind thinking. And that just naturally just piques my interest. I'm just curious about it. I'm not even using it as a way to get like level up or any sort of practical use for it. It's just interesting. It's a whole nother world. And I like the aspect of not knowing about something and being like, holy crap, that type of thought exists. And I didn't know that. I can employ that. And so that's just what I've been curious about.
Yeah, I know that your first few startups were in the social media realm. Would you say you're a social media person?
It depends, right? I've always viewed social media as a component of work and some objective I'm trying to further. But I also have my own sort of personal thing, right? I think like maybe a couple of years ago, I would be like, yeah, I use social media to post stuff about my personal life and get a bunch of likes and feel better about myself. Whereas now, I think that I use it as a distribution channel for
Yeah.
some of my creative stuff, and also a good way to keep in touch with people that I've just met. And I'm like, hey, I don't really have the time to go out and grab a coffee with you. It like adds up over the years, but here's just something I wrote. You can just write back to me right then and there. And there's not really a purpose of growing my following, or there's not really an external thing aside from a good way of keeping touch with real human beings. And the business side is totally different, right? I think like it's a great tool to use to attract your customers, people engaged. And I think it's just a facet of life at this point. But the way that I use it is definitely different than when Instagram first sort of came out of how I sort of use it. And I go through different phases of going really involved into it and not. I think over the past year, I was way more active on Twitter than I ever was before, because I just got into sort of more writing for fun. And I think that, if I had to choose between posting a picture and writing something that's like 200 characters or 260, I think that Twitter is definitely the more sort of intellectual challenge, I guess, right?
Gotcha.
So I view that as sort of a good habit if you're tweeting. Not that it's always healthy and you get a lot of crazy people on Twitter and kind of everything makes sense, but like you're developing the skill of writing. And I like reading a book or a passage and then being able to sort of distill it into my own thoughts and quickly sort of putting it out there. It's like this public notebook almost, right? Of my thoughts that normally would maybe stay inside some sort of Word doc or something like that. So yeah, social, but not. But it's
Gotcha.
very easy to get burned out from it. That's it.
So similarly, your startup now, yeah, I'd love for you to explain what Law Trades is. But you also never practice. So it's interesting. You've never practiced yourself, but you're catering to an industry of practitioners, right?
Yeah. And I think in the beginning, maybe viewed that as a little bit of a weakness, but I think that that was one of the greatest things I could have not done, I guess, is like work as a traditional lawyer. Because all of my ideas was just, it wasn't tainted by how a law firm model should be or how lawyers should or shouldn't work, or there wasn't all these sort of preconceived notions about the legal industry. I mean, I actually had I probably worked in public interest way more than private. I worked at the Legal Aid Society. I worked for the Texas Civil Rights Project. And it was a very nonprofit sort of background that I had. But ultimately, I knew I wanted to go into private practice if the startup didn't pan out or didn't succeed or whatever. But it just allowed me to think of it in very simple baby terms, right? Which is just like I was graduating into one of the worst job markets within legal. And how do I get lawyers paid, right? You're an independent lawyer. You might not have 10 years to build up your reputation and sort of find clients that way over the course of a decade. So what if there was an internet platform that allowed lawyers to monetize their law degrees online from the comfort of their own homes while they're traveling? They set their own hours, they pick and choose their own clients. And what if we found them a bunch of companies that wanted to hire them because it is about 60 or 70% cheaper working with an independent lawyer than it is at a law firm? Because when you work at a law firm or you work with a law firm, your company sort of hiring them, you're paying an insane hourly rate because there's a bunch of partners at the top that are sort of making millions of dollars a year in bonuses off the backs of associates who don't really make as much money. And then you're also paying into their fancy office on Park Avenue and all these other extras. And what if you got rid of all of that physical infrastructure? What if you got rid of partners that just siphoned money at the top and you just restarted this work model and made it completely flat and allowed a company to directly hire an independent lawyer in a really easy way by matching them with the exact location, the practice area, the price point, and then you create an elegant experience for both sides to work together and pay each other and get on the same terms and review each other. You're ultimately creating a brand new work model, one that's based around freedom and flexibility for the lawyer, which is something that I've always wanted, right? Like I had this weird background of never being able to stay at one job, and I wanted to be my own boss. And I just figured like there's probably a bunch of other lawyers that felt the same way, especially lawyers who worked in big law for 8 to 9 years and they didn't end up making partner and they're burned out and maybe they want to start a family, maybe they want to hang out with their kids. So they want to work like 35 hours a week and they're fine with that, right? But there's nothing that exists that allowed them to do that, like a Shopify for lawyers almost. There wasn't something like that existed. So that was the initial sort of seeding idea for Law Trades, which is this marketplace platform. And we predominantly sell to big tech companies and we help them scale up their legal departments by connecting them to a vetted network of freelance legal talent. So lawyers, paralegals, contract admins spread all around the world.
I signed
And
up, by the way.
oh,
I'm
nice.
glad. Thanks for having a compliance section as a compliance officer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We're seeing a lot of compliance related, ops related work. So it's been sort of organically expanding beyond lawyers because that was sort of the main thing. But it took us a while to find product market fit. And now we essentially work with companies like Pinterest and DoorDash and
That's awesome.
Headspace and Open Door. And they essentially use our network of lawyers to scale up their operations.
I'd love to hear about your how you got started. So you don't have a tech background either. So how did you get started? And you got into one of these incubators, 500 startups, and how did that come about?
Yeah. So I've read books essentially. So like I'm trying to think of what was the real sort of way, because there's always all these forces in my life growing up, or just I needed to sort of be my own person and be independent. And I think that I was just like living in a time where I was always really fascinated by the internet. I loved using AOL Instant Messenger growing up. I loved sort of seeing different websites and like how they built it and how it looked, back in the early 2000s. And I don't know, I came across this book when I was in law school because I was just, like it was something called like Millionaire Fastlane or something really cheesy. But I just was just like, why is it so hard to figure out how to get rich? Why isn't that just like there? Why can't I just search for that and get like a good result and just follow that rule? Because more than anything, I probably wanted to do that because I view that as tied into like freedom. So I picked up this book and I read it, and there wasn't actually a whole lot there around internet companies, but there was something in there about music that really resonated with me and how musical artists got really rich. Now, if I explain it, it might seem very obvious, but at the time, the way that it broke it down for me was really sort of eye opening, which is just musicians they think of a song, they think of a creation, they record it once and they sell it a million times. And for the million and one time, it costs the same amount as the first time you sort of produced it because the cost of replication of it is negligible. So you create something once, and if you have the right distribution, which at the time was like, in my head, the internet, you can infinitely scale at a zero cost margin. And it's open 24/7. And there's millions of people on the internet. So that idea of build once, sell twice really stuck with me when I was in law school. So I experimented with this web app for Facebook, which at the time essentially allowed you to customize your cover photo on top. So essentially at one of like the Facebook conferences at F8, they were like, hey, we're going to roll out this thing called cover photos or something. And now anybody is going to be able to upload a big banner image on their profile. And so I thought that it would be a cool idea to have a website that had like thousands of different sort of cover photo images perfectly cropped and sized to that Facebook cover. And with one click using the Facebook app integration, it would change it automatically on your Facebook profile and then post it on your timeline that, hey, I just used this website to change my cover photo to this Justin Bieber thing or this, motivational quote thing or whatever. And I must have spent probably $300 in launching it. I found some guy in China that wrote the code for me, and I just got the website up. I knew basic like HTML, so I was new enough to sort of get the website up. And I just asked some other people for help, and I bought the domain name, Facebook My FB cover photo. And I did a bunch of SEO, like I read about SEO as well, right? So I was going deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. And I just basically had this blank website, but essentially with all of these keywords in it that said cover photos, Facebook cover photos, like things that I felt like people would search for once Facebook actually made this public and dropped it. And when they did drop it, the site essentially went viral. At its peak, it was getting like 30 million hits a month. And I ran Google ads on it, Google AdSense, and turned it into a 6-figure business. While I was in law school, I think at its peak, it was doing like 250 to 280K a year just from clicks. And I would just sort of wake up and
did you tell your parents that? And what was their first reaction? Did they believe you?
Yeah, my mom didn't until I showed her the AdSense account. And I was just like, yeah, here's, $25,000 I made this month basically doing nothing. I was just at home and just updating different images or whatever. And she was blown away. My dad didn't really get it. / we always had a weird relationship growing up. Not that he didn't care. It was just like, we didn't really talk like that. He wasn't really the first person I would call when I'm just like, oh my God, I figured this out. We were just very kind of, I don't know, I feel a lot of Bengali people and they're, especially if you're a son and the son-dad relationship can be a little bit distant and whatever.
Bengalis that I think tend to be very hardworking. But part of that, I feel like, and I feel that way with my uncles and dads, is like if something doesn't require a ton of work, work,
Mhm.
they don't think it's real or you deserve it. So
Yeah,
it's from his perspective, you just put up a site and you're making all this money,
yeah,
and maybe you don't deserve it.
definitely. It was almost too easy,
Yeah,
and I didn't really. He grew up basically doing a lot of like manual labor and
yeah,
physical labor. So to him, to not even totally understand what the internet even was, to be like, how is this even possible? You're just you just don't get it. You just don't understand it. And I think that my mom was definitely like pretty like she was a very empathetic person. So she was just like, I don't get it, but that's really cool. And it's like you did this sitting around. She couldn't also understand. Just she worked at this hospital at the time, and she's like, I'm running around all day long, and I
yeah,
make a fraction of that. And I did a bunch of other sub websites after that. One for Twitter, one
yeah.
one for Facebook, one was an Indian version of that. But I just knew at that point there was nothing else I would do other than build stuff on the internet. It was just a no brainer for me. And I didn't really have too many friends that even did this. There was maybe one friend. And at that time, we weren't that close. His name was Fahim Saleh. And he actually recently passed away this
Yeah.
past year as well as with my mom. He was the only person that I knew that was doing stuff on the internet.
Mm.
And I would just bug him all the time after I built that site and try to meet up with him as much as possible. And he was way further along than me because he'd actually built out his website, Frank Allen. I think he was doing like $1 million a year. And I was just like, okay, I need to catch up to that slash, like get on his level sort of. So it was a lonely process, but I was able to see that path. And then I got more into tech and I was like, okay, there's a bunch of other people doing this. And I read in the beginning, it was just a few books and what I saw Fahim do from the sidelines. But that was enough for me to just be like, holy crap, this is where I'm going to build my life's work. And I'm going all in on that.
Did you look for a technical co-founder for Law Trades, or is that something you don't have to worry about because of the incubator?
It's funny because they were like, at the time when we applied and we got in, they were like, you can come with one exception, which is you find a technical third person to join the team. At the time, the only other person that I really recruited was my co-founder Ashish, who was also non-technical, but he was really good at sales and operations and face-to-face and all of that. And I really sort of excel in product development, product strategy, design, community, marketing. But at the time, we didn't really have a third person at the time that we applied. So in some sort of miraculous way, we found out we got in 2 or 3 days before the program started. And literally within 48 hours, we went through all of our contacts, went through our Facebooks, went through our LinkedIn. And luckily, Ashish knew somebody that was a developer and connected us to him. And literally within 2 days' notice, he ended up moving to California with us before we even really got a chance to know him or anything like that. And then we spent almost a year out in Silicon Valley building the company together. But it all just sort of came together at the very last minute. And I think a lot of good things happen that way, where sometimes the more you try and more you force, and it wasn't like we never wanted a technical co-founder. We just weren't really happy with the people that could potentially join us. And I feel like I have a pretty good intuition on people, or at least I think that I do. And then at the last minute, we got him, and there was actually four of us at the time. We had another designer, so it was myself, Ashish, our sort of CTO at the time, and our designer, and we just moved out to Mountain View and went through the accelerator and got introduced to a bunch of investors who ended up putting some money into the business.
So
But
before the accelerator, it was just an idea. You didn't have anything built.
I did. It was, initially just a landing page that
Gotcha.
was like, hey, I can provide legal services and I need to receive legal services. And we just like email introduced people together. It was a very simple form that I just
Gotcha.
basically set up, and I just need to validate this in the beginning. And it sort of improved from there. It was just like step by step, became an appointment booking thing. Then it eventually became a marketplace that didn't accept payments. And it became a marketplace that did accept payments. Then it became a marketplace that accepted payments that then worked with enterprise companies. So there was all these, it was just different phases, different eras of just like understanding the market and understanding our customers. And we just had the longevity because we always made sure to charge money for it. We weren't one of those startups that we needed to just raise a lot of money up front for it to become something. We've always just charged something and made sure there was always revenue in the bank account for us to either split or bring on somebody else to join the team. So it was a bunch of little iterations over the last couple of years that eventually got it to be where it is today.
What are the pros and cons of going through an incubator versus friends and family or self-funding?
I would say the incubator accelerator route is cool because they give you money. I think 500 startups invested 125K into us, and they're professional investors. So there's validation because they've invested in a lot of other successful companies before. Psychologically, you're like, oh, okay, maybe I can be like the unicorn or like a public company because they've invested in companies like that in the past. And then you get to work with, I don't know, I think at the time, I don't know, like 15 or 20 other companies in a similar stage as you. So you get the sense of community, everyone's sort of going through the same struggles, and you just sort of replace your friends with all these other ambitious people because you're just, moved from New York all the way to California. And that was really cool to just change your surroundings just like that. Where you live, where you ate, who you talked with. And they were just replaced by this mystical place called Silicon Valley, where somehow Apple and Google and Microsoft started. And the office we were working at was where Elon Musk started his first company before PayPal. And he like slept in that office. And it was just like, I drove by the Facebook house and there's all this like historical, inspiring vibe there that was just very different than like being in Long Island or being in Queens. Part of it was illusional, right? We're just like, yeah, like everything's going to be fine because if they did it, we could do it. But sometimes you need a little bit of that delusion to sort of kickstart your dreams where you have to be a little bit naive. You have to be a little bit overconfident based on your surroundings because otherwise it's so easy to get into your own head and just think that it's absolutely ridiculous to build a $10 million business or something like that, right? Like it would just be like, what? That's stupid. I have this website that just collects email addresses and introduces them. How on earth would this ever make like $500,000 a month or $1 million a month? But if you have a combination of like, there's people out there that did this, I'm surrounded by other people that are doing this, and there's investors that have seen this happen and they want equity in my company, right? So there's a lot of it where you're independently thinking, you're thinking for yourself, but to like have all of those forces draw you in versus like a friends and family sort of thing, you're no longer in your own reality. You're in a different reality right now. And I think that's important. Nowadays, I think it's different. I moved to Long Island City to get away from that, where it became a thing where everyone I met in San Francisco was doing a tech company. So everyone was thinking the same way and hiring the same people and, thinking about the same. It was just too much of the sameness. I just want to move back and I want to build a really big company in Queens, which is where I was born. And I got this cool office that's right nearby my apartment, which is similar to like our flow in Silicon Valley. It was like our house was here, our office was here. There's just one street. And I wanted to sort of recreate that here. And I got to sort of like make that happen. And then we went into this another like 2+ year journey of just not hanging out with any tech people. We're just going to do our own thing and figure it out because we did struggle a lot even after we raised our initial round of funding. And we couldn't find product market fit. So we just kind of was just like, let's just go into a 2-year hole and shut the door behind us. And until we get profitable, we're not going to do anything else. Like, we're just going to figure this out somehow, some way. And that's what we did.
So your mom passed away, but what's your family's impressions of what you're doing now?
They love it now. Now it's like, I think this month we should be surpassing like 600,000 in monthly revenues by like 620, 630, something like that. And probably by the end of the year, we'll hit $1 million a month. So when you drop numbers like that, they will sort of be like, like, okay, I'm going to ask more questions about what it is that you do now, right? Like, so tell me more about this internet thing. How can I get involved? But I know that my dad is really proud of me now. I actually got married during COVID. We had this Zoom wedding in my sister's backyard and he gave a talk. And my dad is the typical sort of non-emotional Bengali guy that just got emotional.
Yeah.
Everything over the last 10, 15 plus years all came out at once. And he just kind of gave an acknowledgement and just like, I didn't think that this is going to be what you would become. And you're always like this shy, quiet little kid that I don't know where the exact connection with that totally is, but he always sort of thought that I was more of the passive type
Mm.
because I didn't always speak up or try to be the loudest person in the room. And I think to a certain extent, I'm definitely an introvert and I'm definitely more in my head than I am in speaking and or just sharing or whatever. And I kind of like it that way. So to him, that was, I guess, his surprise of it. And he was just like, I'm super proud of you and just amazing to see it grow. I had no idea that this is what you basically become, partly because he had this idea that I would become this pharmacist. And that was his thing. He wanted me to be a pharmacist and make like, I think at the time, pharmacists make 100K a year or something. And I'm like, look, Dad, I'm doing that in a week now, right? I'm still sitting at a desk and sometimes coming into work and sometimes not, and working on writing and books and films and other sci-fi weird stuff and doing this at the same time. And I've just kind of viewed my whole life a little bit like that, which is like, it's not an or, right? Where I'm like, I'm either a startup founder or I'm an investor. You can be a startup founder and an investor and a bookworm and a skateboarder and a musician, whatever it is that you sort of want to do. We live in that day and age where anything is really possible thanks to the internet. You just have to put in a little bit more effort than most people.
Now, if you had to wear a tie for one of those things you're doing, would you wear a tie or no? Completely against it.
I would never wear a tie, but I think I'm going to have to wear a tie for these weddings. I have 2 weddings coming up and I might have to break it. I actually still have a pretty good tie collection in my closet from the days I worked at the Texas Survivors Project and Legal Aid Society and different networking events I had to show up in law school. But it's usually just more like a reminder. It's like one of those tie hangers with 50 of them, all like kind of in there. And sometimes I just look at it and that's where I don't want to be. Just like kind of like a reminder of where I was, where I am. Now it's just t-shirts, but.
Wow, we've been talking for an hour. It's amazing. I wanted to just one question. You mentioned your friend Fahim, and obviously it's tragedy, but what he did in Bangladesh is just amazing. Would you ever invest in Bangladesh, or do you ever see yourself going back and starting something in Bangladesh?
I think definitely it's something that I like. It's funny because I like put out this intention into the universe that I wanted to be more involved in Bangladesh, and I guess for me at my current place and state, like it'd have to be something a little bit more than just going and visiting family. There would need to be some kind of commercial business investing aspect to it. And I actually got connected with, I think he might have been on your podcast. He runs the
Anchorless.
He runs this angel group.
Yep, he was. Yep. Well, that's where I found you. I saw you on his program.
Oh, okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Awesome guy. Awesome organization. And I sort of just put out this intention like, hey, like, what can I do? And, I want to get involved. And then I just got this cold email from him and we chatted and ended up doing the thing that you saw, my interview with him. And he sent some deals my way. I haven't invested in a startup just yet, but I think that that's probably how I would want to start, by just writing a couple of small checks into maybe some early stage companies. I guess I'm like looking more for a Bangladeshi startup that's doing like a marketplace B2B similar to mine. So like I can at least like offer some value than just doing like anything and everything that's not really within my expertise. So like something like that hasn't come up yet, which is why I haven't done that deal yet. But I feel like I don't know if I would go as hard as Fahim did, because I mean, he was just all about that. And, with Tao and like a bunch of other, Bokata, I mean, just based in Africa, but he was very big in that international scene. And I don't know if I would start a company or something there. Obviously, if Law Trades expands there, that would be amazing. And I'd love to sort of get involved in that. But I think that, if there's some opportunity where I could help out other tech entrepreneurs that are in Bangladesh or help them get connected with some investors that are here, or mentor them, or write like a small check into their seed round or pre-seed round and give them product feedback, that would make my day, right? Because I just think about how insanely lucky I am to be living here, to be born in America, right? Especially after COVID, where it's just, I didn't even have to worry about the vaccination, right? Like I literally had a friend that owned a pharmacy and I was able to get it right away. Even while all the senior citizens were basically getting it, he just hooked me up. Whereas over there, like that is actually a real thing. And it's like, how are you expected to work on a startup idea and make internet websites when you can't even I mean, obviously it's different now. I'm just using sort of extreme analogies here, but like, you can't even get an injection to hopefully guarantee that you're going to live. How can you even focus on anything else, right? Like, if I was just born in the village and I had zero internet connection, I'd probably be fishing or something like that, right? Because that's all I knew. That was the world that I sort of grew in. That was the bubble that I grew up in. But how lucky is it that my parents just happened to have decided to move here and give birth to me here? And, I didn't have the most perfect life. And sometimes I complain about that. It's just like I was born in the greatest country, arguably, in the entire world, and also the greatest city/state almost in the entire world. The chances of that are so insane. You just look at it from like all the other Bangladeshi people, right? So like that's why I kind of like never, or I try my best to never take any days for granted. And I try to just do everything I can do every single day. And that's a lot. And I don't really sleep that well. And I don't really have a lot of time to hang out with family and friends because of that. But I really, especially after these two deaths, especially after my mom passed, and then like literally 6 months later, Fahim passed, and they were two pivotal forces in my life. As we sort of chatted earlier, my mom was sort of like the person encouraging me after the Facebook web app that, yeah, this is kind of cool. Like, go do that more. I played music before. I played in a punk rock band, and she was kind of encouraged that sort of creativity. And then with Fahim, it was just I saw proof that this is a viable way of making a living. You can actually take your ideas, take your imaginations, and splash it there on the internet, and it could create value for so many people, right? The biggest thing that makes me so excited about law trades is like there's all these independent lawyers making money on the internet because of this platform. They're earning a living off of this idea, and they're internet strangers. I've never met them. I've never seen them in person. I've seen some of them in person, but generally they're just people that are internet strangers, and they write to me and they're just like, you help me pay down my student loans. You help me, be able to stay at home and watch my kid who has this weird condition that requires me to stay at home, or there's all these things, and just that is just like amazing. And I think after I sort of lost both of them, it just kind of recalibrated what I was doing and why I was doing it, and how insanely limited our time here is on earth, and how ephemeral it is, and how all of this is just going to, all your accumulation, all your ideas, all your whatever, it can just be gone just like that, right? And it is going to be gone just like that. Like after 5,000 years, I don't think anyone's going to remember me. I don't think they're going to remember you. No one's going to remember this podcast or whatever. Like maybe there'll be some flash drive or something, a historical artifact. So that is obviously a little bit morbid to think about, but there's this ephemeral beauty to it, that it's almost like it doesn't matter. There isn't this like really big significance anymore. So you should take every shot that you can get. You should just go for it. You should just do it, because no one else is going to. And no one else also knows exactly what they're doing. So you might as well just follow your own gut, follow your intuition.
I love what you said earlier. I think about it all the time. I mean, if my parents didn't come here, what would I have been doing in Bangladesh? And what you said, I would have been fishing, working on a farm somewhere. What part of Bangladesh was your family from?
My dad was from Borishal.
Oh, me too.
Which is like more of the, oh, sweet. Maybe he might know your family or something like that.
I guess. And I wrote an article about this. Well, maybe not our generation, but older generation. You just find somebody from the same village, and he was just like, there's just immediate connection. They have this immediate connection. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, it's really awesome. And I think that staying along with that instant connection analogy, I feel like part of building a company is all of those connections that you make, right? It's like your company is this ideal utopian world that this is how I wish the world was. And I get to sort of create it. And in that process, you get to pick who you work with, which is essentially like picking your friends. And instead of friends that you go out grabbing a drink with at happy hour, it's friends that you hang out and you get to build stuff and you make money together. And you get to just develop those connections and create your own world and work with really smart people. And selfishly, it's like that's also the best parts about it, is like I get to just surround myself with people I genuinely respect, people that push me and I push them. And we just repeat this process. And it's like, this is our world now, right? It's our little bubble now. And back in the days, pre-internet, it was just that, right? It was just like, okay, your coworkers, your neighbors, your family, friends, whatever. Now it's like you publish something on Twitter and someone sees it and they'll DM you, then you'll meet up in person and you've never known them before. And there's customers that we just came back from San Francisco that we met and we grabbed dinner with them. And I was just like, there was no other reason for us to meet aside from that process. So there's all these like relationships that intertwine and is able to get created from when you actually like, I'm not advocating everybody should start a company, but I think that I can't think of any other better way to get all of these benefits. Obviously, there's the stress of it and all of that. But if you're truly into the art of creating and starting a business, all of that is just part of the process or whatever. But the upside that you get from it is really amazing. And you're not going to see that upside in the first year. You're going to see it in the second year. You might see it in the third year. But it is just the long haul process of coming in, showing up day in and day out. Not because it's a habit, not because it's like, oh, there's some morning routine to how, like, what is a morning routine of millionaires? Let me go repeat it. And maybe now I'll have a successful startup. It's like, no, you just have to figure out what it is that society wants, but doesn't know yet how to get it. And you have to just create that. And you have to keep trying to create that. And I think interesting stuff sort of happens in that process. And you and me are recording this podcast and like, you're going to put it out there in the internet and there could be thousands of people that see this, hundreds of thousands of people that listen to this. And it's not going to cost you anything for that to happen. We could have easily just done this in a coffee shop and I just talked to you for an hour or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But nobody else would be able to hear it. So it's an amplifier. It's one of the greatest wealth creation machines, like, I don't know, ever invented to date, right? I can't think of something, maybe in 100 years, there'll be something else that's sort of different. So I feel like might as well just take advantage of that.
Are you still not a morning person?
I go through phases. I would say generally I'm not, because my brain starts going off at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm reading about ego, mind, consciousness, thinking about thinking really late into the night. I did go through a couple of months where I like sort of just woke up at like 5 or 6 in the morning and just meditated for a while before I did anything, usually for an hour. And I'm still doing that now. It's just not as early in the morning. But with traveling and a few other stuff, that kind of just gets in the way of that. I've kind of gone back to staying up late and sort of waking up later. But I guess, I don't know, I'm just going with it, right? If I wake up and I still don't use an alarm, I just kind of wake up on my own. And if that happens to be early in the morning, great, I'll wake up before sunrise and do what I have to do. If it's not, then it's okay. I don't really feel stressed about that. As long as I'm performing well and I'm at peak creativity, which is like being alone for a little bit for a couple of hours at some block in the day, then I'll be happy.
And you're still unplugging from social media from 8:30 to 12:30?
Yes, for the most part. I did this writing challenge on Twitter recently where you're just essentially writing 30 mini essays every day for 30 days to sort of build a writing habit. That required me to sort of write and publish in the morning a little bit more. But generally, I think that I do unplug. If I'm doing that, it's just to literally like publish something. I'm not really on the feeds. I'm still mostly on airplane mode. All my notifications are usually off. I'm not really interacting with anybody. My calendar is usually, I don't really take any meetings earlier than 11 just because like either that's like my time that I'm like writing or doing something creative or doing deep work, or B, I'm just sleeping because I was up till 4 o'clock in the morning. So either way, I just don't want to really be bothered essentially at that time. And I don't know, I think just doing that is really important. I think just alone time and solitude just doesn't get enough love, you know, going for walks by yourself, sitting down and just, you don't have to think of meditating as like, oh, you have to focus on your breath or listen to some app or something guided. It's like, no, just like sit with yourself and just close your eyes and just be with yourself and let whatever come to you. How is it that you can sit in front of a computer for 8 hours without thinking twice, but you can't be with yourself for an hour? You can't just write something on a notepad for no purpose or whatever. So that to me was just like, I'm not saying that that's what everybody should do. And like, I do that and I'm like great because of that. But that drew my curiosity of like, why can't I sit still? Why can't I not be on social for a couple of hours? And that just kind of drove me deeper and deeper into that whole world a little bit.
I mean, I love talking to you. I like just getting to know you and also just your way of thinking. I think it's fascinating. I'm glad you came on. Super proud of what you're doing with Law Trades. I mean, continued success. Thanks for coming on. Hope you come back.
Yeah, I will. And thank you so much. And I think what you're doing for the Bangladeshi community is really awesome. And yeah, I appreciate your time. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.